Welcome to Initiate Talks Innovation Investment. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Noortje van Heijst, who is an investor associate at Ventures One, a VC fund based in The Hague. Noortje recently completed her master's at the Rotterdam School of Management, and based on her research, which was conducted in collaboration with Energy Investment Management, published a report that compared the decision-making process between 3 different investor types into early-stage renewable energy startups. Noortje, before we go into your research findings in more detail, can you briefly describe the objectives of your research and how you went about achieving those?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a pleasure of being here virtually. So as a scholar and also as an academic university student, I am very much interested by the topic of sustainability, and especially in the energy sector. So I knew that I wanted to do something with the energy transition, and the renewable energy innovation area, intrigued me a lot. In collaboration with Energy Investment Management, I came up with the idea to actually dive a bit deeper in which renewable energy innovations are around and how these starting companies are actually getting capital. Because what you see is that, like every starting venture, renewable energy startups have a lot of challenges, and raising capital is one of them. But actually in this conservative, relatively capital-intensive industry, for these startups it's maybe even harder. To date, even these energy investments activities are declining, while we all notice that global climate change is happening and we actually need to take action. So there are like 2 different forces: my personal interest and of course the fact that I wanted to research something that is really from a societal perspective relevant. I decided to look into what drives investors to invest in these renewable energy startups, and also how they perceive risks when they invest.
Thank you, Noortje. You've sort of part answered my next question. So as you've explained, your research focused on early stage renewable energy startups. Obviously the startup community is very broad. So what made you decide, or can you explain in a bit more detail why you decided to focus on that particular group of energy tech startups?
Yeah, sure. So the main focus of my research is on the more hardware-related energy solutions. So the next generation windmill or a storage solution, which is actually something that is quite capital-intensive, rather than a software solution, which can be developed quite easy. And therefore also for investors like a traditional venture capital fund, maybe not that interesting to invest in. Because as you know, as a venture capitalist, you want to go to an exit in around 5 to 7 years. And with a hardware solution, which has to be manufactured and on a large scale implemented, that can actually take a lot longer. But I noticed that we actually need these solutions in the energy transition. So what structure is in place, and which investors are actually investing in this early stage ideas that we need so badly, and that's the main reason why I chose this specific industry.
Brilliant. And when you were investigating the variance in the screening criteria and risk avoidance strategies, and kind of importantly their interplay across the 3 different investor types, what findings were unexpected, and were even some of them taking you slightly by surprise?
Yeah, so maybe to give a bit more background on the research was mainly focused on 3 different types of investors. So as I already noticed, these are the traditional venture capital funds. But aside from that, I included business angels or individuals, wealthy individuals that invest informally in ventures, and strategic investors. And these are the corporate venture capital funds. So the large energy and utility companies have their venturing arm, and they invest in starting companies as well. And I was very much interested if these investors differ from each other in how they evaluate a startup in the investment process. And actually, there's a lot of research already on if these investor types differ, but not specifically in this industry, and also not really about how these differences can be explained. And that's where my research brought a bit of a new angle, because I focused on risk strategies, or actually risk avoidance strategies from these investors. So I developed risk profiles of them. And then I linked that. I tried to see if there was a link in what they also find important in the evaluation of a startup. Because you can look at team, you can look at business model, you can look at financials, you can look at potential exit opportunities. And everything is, of course, important, but investors differ from each other. And what I found, which was really interesting, is actually that these risk profiles resonate in a almost 100% way with where they are also looking for. So for instance, I found that venture capital investors are very risk averse, the most risk averse basically of the three types that I investigated. And mostly this is on competitive risks. So that are the risks that another company is doing a similar thing, which can be a substitute or anything as a competitor. And therefore, they also mainly look at financial metrics. So is there revenue? How does the valuation look like? And they try to minimize this risk by looking at specific aspects of the venture. And this is the same for business angels. They invest mainly from a personal perspective. So they invest because they like the industry, they came from it themselves, or they want to actually learn about the industry. They mainly focus on investing in teams that they really like, and they also like them. So where there is a very much connection between the entrepreneur and the business angel. And this is all not really surprising. So if you ask me what findings were unexpected, I think we are going to discuss one probably after. But I think the nice thing is that I actually found this connection in risk profiles and criteria that investors use, as this is very new thing in the academic world, and I think also especially relevant for starting companies looking for investment and for investors to better understand their own decision making.
Great. Since you mentioned that, let's go on to this. One of the findings that struck me, and that was in relation to the VCs that you spoke with and interacted with, did not score exit strategy highly in their kind of when you brought their risk profile together. So which was very different from what you found with business angels. I think I know the answer to this question, but I mean, did that certainly surprised me? Did that finding also surprise you? And I suppose now that you're within the VC camp, have you had a sort of chance to reflect on what can be drawn from that particular finding?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the findings that were based on the data that I have collected is that there is a very small pattern that actually business angels would be mostly looking for potential exit opportunities. That's mainly in their risk profile. So they are actually afraid that there isn't going to be a very good exit opportunity for the investment that they do. And that can actually be explained very easily because business angels do not have such a large network as a traditional venture capital fund. And the strategic investors, so the corporate, of course, has a very large network in the industry. So the business angel has a higher risk profile in this. Okay, I have to make sure that there is a potential exit opportunity in some way in my network. I have to know some people. So for them, that radar is actually also really important. And what you can also notice that in the specific industry, so this is very much capital intensive tech industry, exits are also not always the main goal of a venture capital fund. And from my own experience, the fund that I'm working for is actually also not focused on exits. We are really there to build long-lasting companies, and not fully focused on in like 7 years we need an exit. So I think in this sector, in the renewables and clean tech sector, actually a lot of funds are not so focused on exits as in maybe in other industries. So I think that could be a good explanation, but it could also be that it's just a finding based on the data that I have collected. That's maybe not the case in the full industry, but it was indeed unexpected. Yeah.
Well, like you say, it was a finding that came out of your data, so that's good. So, you know, we've obviously talked about there's the investor types and the startups. So, what would be your recommendations as the main takeaways for those particular groups, and maybe any other stakeholder group in terms of your report findings?
Yeah, definitely. So I think my findings, the findings of the report, are relevant for both startups, investors, as well as governmental organizations. And I will go by them one by one. So I think for the entrepreneurs, the findings are very much interesting for them to notice that actually the investors look at very different things in the evaluation of their organization, their venture. And actually in this sector, as a starting company, you could use the findings to see, okay, which boxes do I tick? All right, then I should go to a business angel. If not, then I could maybe better address some strategic investors or venture capitalists. So it's really about tailoring your fundraising activities to also the investor that is most receptive of this and also most likely to invest. I think as an entrepreneur, you're working on 10 million times at the same time, and you are trying to minimize the time that's gonna be wasted to reaching out to investors. So if you want to structure your fundraising, I think it's very interesting to also really look at the motivations and the risk profile of an investor and see, hey, okay, do I fit with this investor type? For investors, as I'm now also working at a fund, I think you see a lot of potential prospects every day, and you have to screen them in an efficient way. And I think a lot of investors have their methods for that already, but still, I think it's always good to reflect, to see, hey, how do I actually make a decision? And my research actually helps with that, because in an experimental way, I helped investors to better be able to see, oh, I'm actually really focusing on team, or I'm surprised. I think I thought always that I think evaluation would be important, but actually I'm more focused about on the business model, for instance. And I selected 12 criteria, 12 screening criteria that are almost every part of every investment decision. And I think investors can really learn and improve their decision-making processes from that. For governmental organizations, it's of course very interesting to know how investors make a decision and which investors are actually most likely to invest in startups, new technologies that we need in the energy transition, as they are of course injecting public money also in private sector to stimulate the energy transition and stimulate investments. And they can also better tailor their policies and their capital injections based on the findings.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Noortje. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and thank you very much for discussing your research findings and providing some really interesting new insights. For anyone interested in receiving a copy of Noortje's report, which I could highly recommend, please find the details on how to do so below. Thanks again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.